Welcome everybody, welcome back to Photography Schoolhouse and tonight's presentation of retouching boudoir photography. So I hope most of you tonight at least saw the presentations that we did, the 3 live broadcasts. These are the pictures that were actually taken during those live broadcasts. And I'm just going to retouch them the way I normally would for a client. So I'm going to bring up my entire process starting with this. And what this is the way that I browse pictures, images. So it's actually a program called ACDC, and I've been using it for many years. You might be using something different. You might be using Lightroom. They all do pretty much the same thing. I'm in the habit of using this. I kind of like it. There's nothing wrong with Lightroom or anything else. This is just what I do. And that pretty much pertains to everything I'm going to say tonight. Everything is what I do. You all know that there's 100 ways of doing things in Photoshop, particularly. What I do isn't necessarily the best. It's just what I do. And it's certainly not the only way of approaching a retouching job. So let's go ahead. This was the very first shoot. Now you've noticed that I've already retouched this, but I'm going to point out each step of the way. When I do a shoot in studio now, I set my camera to shoot in both RAW and high-resolution JPEG at the same time. So I wind up with 2 file folders. All of these main images that you see in front are all RAW. I shoot Canon, so they're CR2 files. And then I also wind up with a folder of high-resolution JPEG images. And this is 9 times out of 10 in a studio shoot, this is the kind of thing that I'd be using. Now you're going to see every single picture. I download the card entirely. You're going to see every single picture I took, including the ones where the flash didn't go off properly. So you know this was raw straight from the camera. So what I normally do then is, if I'm approaching a customer's session, I'll go to my JPEG section. Now, why do I want to have the JPEGs? Why don't I just retouch right off the RAW? And I have done that, and I still do it from time to time. As long as I'm working in the studio, typically my exposures are pretty close. And the only reason I would really need to go back to the RAW file is if I needed to solve some exposure problems or recover some shadows or highlights that were caused by bad exposure. So if I'm doing my job right, I shouldn't have to do that very many times. So I'm going to work just with the raw images. And in this interface, all I do is I bring up one at a time in kind of a larger field, and I start going through them. This one obviously is the flash didn't go, and she's just playing with her cell phone, so it was a setup image. This one's a little overexposed, so this was the initial testing just to get started. And I'll go through them one at a time, and I do this fairly quickly. And I'm looking for one that really catches my eye. So I'm more interested at this point in time about the expression or the mood of the photo. The fact that my background lines are a little bit crooked here, I'm not even really going to worry about that because I can fix that in the next step. I'm just looking for the ones that catch my eye. So if I find one like this, has good eye contact, kind of like that, I'm going to just start with this image to work through a first example. So all I do in this interface, in this software, is I just click on the link to Adobe Photoshop. As I mentioned, I'm not a Lightroom user. Not that I have anything against Lightroom. I've just never really had the need for it. So I don't want to offend anybody who's a big Lightroom fan. So now I brought it into Photoshop. It's totally high resolution, so my image size is raw right out of the camera, 76 inches by 50 inches at 72 dpi. So all I'm going to do is start using my normal workflow, and I use 3 plugins to Photoshop that I've bought over time. The first one is called PictoColor, Eye Correct Portrait, and I've owned this for a number of years. You can see I've got version 2. I think they're way past that now, but version 2 still works for me. And what I like about this, it's a very, very fast and easy way of setting the tonal range. Now I'm going to go back and I'm going to do those 2 clicks slower. So that's raw right out of camera. But if you could watch just as I click this auto black point, you see the image darkened very, very subtly. So it's finding that the black point is very close. So it's looking at the darkest areas of her outfit, the blackest areas, and saying, well, they could be a little bit more black. Now, I can also do the same to the auto white point, but let's think about that for a second. What would be the advantage of doing that in this photo? There is none, because really there isn't a true 100% white. So what it's going to do is it's going to take the brightest, closest thing to white it can find and bump it up even further, which makes it look a little bit over. Not too bad, but a little bit over. And in some images, depending on the content, it can really look bad. So I don't always use the auto white point. It's kind of a judgment call. In this case, I'm going to go ahead and use it. Click OK. Now, I can also, just while we're talking about Eye Correct Portrait, I'm only using a tiny little bit of its features right now. The other thing that I will use from time to time is this memory color. This is skin tones, and I can click on her skin, and you can see how it warmed up the entire image. I don't necessarily want to do that. I'm going to cancel out of this. But if you've got some really funky color going on, particularly if you're shooting in available light and the light just wasn't cooperating, you can really correct out some bad color casts just with a single click. So that's why I've always liked Eye Correct Portrait. It is a paid program that I bought, so you can look that up. Then the next thing I'm going to do is any major repairs. Now, because in these 3 sessions we used models, they're already in pretty good shape, but most of our real world clients aren't. So it's not unusual that I'll go into Filter Liquify, and then I'm going to do some subtle retouching just to neaten things up. If, for instance, she had a bulge, and she doesn't really have a bulge, but I'm going to pretend that's an unsightly bulge because many people have them right about that area. So I could take Liquify's forward warp tool and just snug that bulge in a little bit just to make the lines a little bit cleaner. Now, Liquify is a dangerous tool. You can really go overboard with it. But if you do it subtly, I think you'll be happy with the results. Now in boudoir photography, you might be tempted to do some breast enlargement. Again, she doesn't need it, but you can, with just a couple of clicks, you can make them just a tiny bit larger. This brings us into kind of a moral discussion. How much should we be altering the client's real body? And somebody like this model is Lori. I wouldn't do any Liquify to her at all. She's pretty much perfect. But real world clients, as I said before, usually have a couple of little areas that you want to neaten up. But my belief is that you don't take that to the point of turning them into a person that they're not. We had a heavyset plus size lady in a while ago. And I'm a big guy myself, so believe me, I'm not knocking plus size, but plus size is sometimes a little bit difficult to pose with. You get bulges where you don't really want them. So I did a certain amount of Liquify, but I still left her as a plus size lady. I didn't turn her in to Lori like you see on screen. So it really is kind of a judgment call as to how you want to do this. But nonetheless, Liquify would potentially be a next step depending on the nature of the client. I'm just going to cancel out of that for now. That is not a paid plugin. That is just a regular, plain old Photoshop feature. So the next thing I would do is some skin softening. And I do use a paid plugin for this called, it's from Imaginomic, and it's called Portraiture. If any of you are using it, though, I want to draw your attention to the settings for Boudoir. And I got this from a guy that worked at Imaginomic. His name was George. So I called this preset George. And if you want to jot this down, the detail smoothing is fine set to -20, medium set to 0, large set to +20, and the threshold set to 40. Portrait size is set to auto detect. The skin tones mask is turned off. Do not use the skin tones mask at all. And then sharpness of 10, and then zeros down the board. It's really a very nice preset for boudoir or glamour. Now, for regular family portrait work, this is probably way too much. But for glamour, beauty, boudoir seems to work beautifully. So I'm going to go ahead and set that, and it's going to bring that action into my image. And you can see how much it's going to pop, how much it softened right off the bat. You'll also see that I have 2 layers. I'm on my layers palette over here. I have 2 layers. Because it softens everything equally, then I'm going to wind up with softness in areas that I don't really want. And so what I'll do is I'll turn off the background layer. I'll highlight the background copy that the Portraiture plugin made, and I'll go to the erase tool. Now, areas that I really want to remain perfectly sharp are in the eyes. So I'll erase the mask from the eyes. I'll erase it from the lips. So it's going to look a little funky for a minute. And I really don't like it on hair, so I'm going to enlarge my brush and just remove it off her hair. Also, if she had bling, if she had a big necklace on or bracelets or anything like that, I'd probably take it out of that area. And sometimes if there's detail in the garment, I like the garment to be nice and sharp and crisp, well, I'll take it out of the garment. So we're really just softening skin other than the areas that I talked about. And if I turn the background layer back on, you can see now how her eyes, lips, hair, and outfit are perfectly sharp like they were in the original. But I'll turn off the skin tone mask, and hopefully you can see this in your interface. So there's as shot, and there's as softened by portraiture. So if I'm happy with that, which I am, I'm just going to merge those layers down. And I might be left with a couple of areas where I want to touch up. So there's a little area down here just under her knee, looks like a little wound. So I'm going to go into the healing brush, spot healing brush. I'm just going to take out any areas like that. And again, she's pretty good. Now, there are other subtle things you can do. Some people might say, well, do I want to take the redness out of her knees or off her chest? You can if you want. I'm not really too fussy about those things. So I'm not going to do it in this case for the sake of speed and time. And then I'd start looking at, okay, is this the finished composition that I want? So I have my crop tool standing by, and let's say that I wanted to present this to the customer as an 8x10. So I could start playing with how I want this final 8x10 to look. So I might want to do something like that so that the rule of thirds, you can see these third grid lines are properly positioned on the subject. So if I do that, I now have an 8x10. And that's typically what I'm trying to present to the customer. Now, I may decide, okay, this is good enough for this. I'm fine. Let's move on. Or sometimes I use my third purchase plugin, which is called Alien Skin. Now, I actually go all the way back to Alien Skin 6, but I think they're all the way up to Alien Skin 10. Um, Now, it came up in the other window. I'm going to see if I can move this over here for you. This is the Alien Skin interface. Now, you can see up at the top all or just color presets or black and white presets only. You can record your favorites, your individual favorites that you like to use all the time so you don't have to hunt them down. Or things that you've used recently. So these are all ones that I've used, and it's showing how the image, it's previews in each one of those. So this one, I'll just click on this first one. That's the after image. So all it's doing is adding some saturation and intensity to the image. If I hit the before button down at the bottom, if I go back and forth, you can see the effect is very subtle, but it's increasing the contrast and the intensity of the colors. And I would go to some of my favorites. If I really want kind of a warmer look, I could go, pardon me, I could go to that one. There's one antique one that I really like. I use this a fair amount of times. It gives it the antique tone. It adds some grain into the image and puts a funky old style border around it. Now the border you can turn on or off separately. You don't have to have the border. I scroll down here and go to overlays and turn off the border. I get the image and the toning and the grain, but I don't get that funky border. So let's say, for instance, that I've decided I like this one. It adds a pinkish glow as if there's some sort of lamp or something up in the corner, spraying light down, and all I have to do is apply. And again, it'll bring that in as a separate layer. So if I change my mind, I can just turn the layer off or delete the layer. Or if I think the effect is too intense, of course, I can just change the opacity of the layer and make the effect a lot more subtle. So it's just a judgment, artistic call. If I like it, I merge it down, and there we are. Now, a question came up from guest 552 about the raw image format. Let me go back a few steps to where I first opened this image, and I showed you that the image was 76 inches by 50 inches at 72 dpi. That's not what I set. That's what Canon sets. That's what it comes in as. But that isn't necessarily the way that I use it. For instance, if I set this for 300 dpi, which is a common printing resolution, it's actually about a 12 by 18 at 300 dpi. And I actually do print 12 by 18, so that's a pretty darn good size for me. So I could do that, and but 12 by 18 at 300 is exactly the same as the other one at 72. It's just there's at 72, it's only a very sloppy resolution, but it says at 72 dpi, this image is 76 inches wide, and I don't want a banner, I just want to print. So that's because we don't really care about the resolution, it's the number of pixels. This image right now has 5,472 pixels by 3648 pixels, so it's a high-res image. Now, when I go into my crop tool, as I did, let me go down to the step. There was the crop tool where I made it an 8 by 10. If I go back here, you'll see that it's 8 by 10 at 300 dpi which again is a really nice printing resolution. So if I'm happy with that image, and that's what I want to present to my customer, I'd just go ahead and save it. And then I'd move on to the next one. And again, I just go through fairly quickly until I find ones that I like. And I'd really do it almost that fast. Normally, because I've got a lot of post-production to do and I don't want to spend forever doing it. I'm just going to skip ahead to where we went to a slightly different set. This was, I can find something radically different. Okay, so again, it's this sort of thing. Let me go into that one. Now, nothing is really different about this image so much. Still do the same procedure. I go to Picto Color. I set my black point. I see if I want to use the white point. I probably do in this one as well. Her eyes are a little bit dark, and so there's about 10 ways of adjusting the eyes. What I do is I simply go to the Dodge tool and just give it a very light sweep with the Dodge tool. Now this is, the exposure of this Dodge tool is down around 34%, and it just adds some brightness in. Now, if I really want to get in on her irises, I could make this a much smaller brush, and I could try and bring out her blue eyes as well. And if her eyes were really bloodshot, I could go into the healing brush, spot healing brush tool, and I could enlarge this ridiculously large, and I could go after individual veins, which there aren't really all that much to do, but you can go in and start playing with that. I have had people with really bad bloodshot eyes. So again, after that, I'd probably go into my skin softener. I go over to my layers palette, turn off the background layer, highlight the copy, use the eraser tool, and like I did before, I just take the soft matte off her eyes and lips and hair. So I retain good detail in that. And this, you could be sloppy about this. It doesn't have to be perfect. And again, if I wanted to retain detail in the garment or in a tattoo, they're proud of their tattoos, these girls. So we'll make them nice and sharp, or sharper. Then I'll merge that down. And then again, I could just go back into alien skin if I wanted to. I could pick a different kind of filter. Maybe I'll go very subtle one. Again, it usually enhances contrast a little bit and maybe increases the saturation. This one punches up the blues, where the previous one I used, what did it punch up? It was the pinkish tones. This now works on bluish tones. And I'd merge that down if I'm happy with it. I'd crop it for an 8x10 if that's what I wanted. That's 8x10 at 300 dpi. Get the composition I want, and bang. So what I'm trying to do in a boudoir shoot, I'm trying to wind up with 30 fully retouched images before I even show them to the customer. I don't show them straight out of camera. I would in a wedding, because I take 1,000 pictures at a wedding. But in a boudoir shoot, I'm going to show them, when they come in to see, they're going to see nothing but fully retouched images, and I'm aiming for about 30 images. Now, when I first started doing this, it might take me 5 hours just to do the retouching, and that was way too long, but I picked up speed over time, and now I can probably bang out a 30-image boudoir session in maybe, I don't know, 2 hours, longer if it's a really, really difficult subject. So I'm not going to do a lot of these. Obviously, where I wound up before, when I posted these up to our Facebook page, this obviously was toned. Slight pink tone added there. Just pretty much softness there and there. And this is a half sepia. I put a half sepia mask on it. Midnight mask. So that was our first shoot. I'm going to skip down to the second one we did. Part 2. And these were some of the images that I wound up with after retouching. So let's pick an image. I did this 3308. Let's see if I can find 3308 and show you how I did it. So that's the full raw image. I'm going to bring that into Photoshop. Again, same procedure. And there are, in this case, most of these actions are plugins, are launched just by hotkeys. So when I'm working in full swing, this actually goes very fast. Now this image, because it already has a lot of blacks in it, as you can see, when I hit the auto black point, practically no change whatsoever. But when I hit the white point, I don't like the yellow tones it introduces, so I'd leave that off. So again, using the exact same Imaginomic portraiture settings, the glamour settings, we'll just do a little bit of skin softening. And notice how nicely that just solved a few problem areas. Now, you could work, and a lot of people advocate working, I could go into each and every skin imperfection with a healing brush or something like that. Why? Why would I even bother? When just doing that in a few seconds solves the problem just about perfectly. So again, I might decide just to take a little bit of that mask off of her hair. The jewelry, I probably leave the jewelry sharp. The garment's pretty good. I'll sharpen up the zipper again. I'm not really sharpening. I am removing the softening is what I'm doing. And so there wasn't a lot to do there, but there we go. And then I'd probably finish this off with an alien skin action. I'm going to use this one. And if that's too intense again, I'll reduce the opacity. Just bring it down a little bit, flatten it, and save it. So if I'm working at full speed, this image might take me 2 minutes to fix. Now, little things like this. There's a little bulge by her waist. I could liquify that out. Wouldn't be hard to do. That's only a couple of clicks as well. I'd use the forward warp tool and I just drag that in just a touch, because, you know, these girls, the image could be drop dead beautiful. They'll find some little detail that they don't like. And for them, that just puts them right off the entire photo. So again, while being very careful about what I choose to liquify and what I don't, I keep in mind that, you know, the customer wants to feel really good about their pictures. And then let's go over to part 3. This was a little bit of a different, because it wasn't always a lingerie session. Boudoir isn't, in my opinion, always about lingerie. Some of it can just be in regular wardrobe, but done kind of in a more sexy style than you would. You wouldn't usually do that as a portrait, family portrait kind of thing. So everything you see here is pretty much exactly the same as what I've already shown you in the other edits. Nothing much changes. I would love to show you some real world clients to show you the kind of problems that we run into, but I make a commitment to my clients that their images will never be shown on screen, on the internet, on Facebook, without their explicit permission. So I have to honor that commitment to them. But like I said, these 3 sessions were all models. The models are pretty darn good. So it's not a good representation of what you're going to find. Now, choices of wardrobe, and we went into this during the webinars and the live DittoCam broadcasts. You know, most women that are coming in for boudoir have, you know, they've had a couple of kids, so they probably have some stretch marks that they're worried about, or some bulges here and there. And part of that can just be the garments that you use to cover that up. So here she's wearing kind of a bustier thing, and she might have stretch marks or not. We don't really know. But if she did, that would be an excellent way of covering them up. So that's basically it. It's elementary. I'm not going to go into sophisticated techniques, because the whole theme of this presentation is, you know, we're assuming that you're entry level, that you're just getting into this. Now, if you've known Photoshop for any length of time, you know just how amazingly detailed Photoshop can get. And you can wind up spending an awful lot of time. So guest 212 says, can you show us what you would do for a heavy set gal? I'm going to have to go back and find one. I did have a plus size woman last year who did give me permission to show her photos. I just got to remember who she was. Crystal. Yes, that was her. So these are shown with permission. I said I really needed a plus size sample for my boudoir album, and I did, because this is more like real world people. So you try and do the posing right off the bat that complements. So let me go back up to the top of this. These were setup shots. Just while I was testing exposure. Now, this particular day, I was using a lot of available light. We have these patio doors in our studio and let some beautiful light in at the right type of day. And I use it whenever I can. Even if I have to go up, I'm usually shooting at 3200 ISO, or maybe even up around 6400. and on rare occasions up around 12,800. You can see from this shot, this was still a setup shot because you can see I've got the light box in it, but I wouldn't even care. I could easily take that out. The bustier, the garment, is covering a whole host of problems around the tummy area. So it's the choice of the garment. And then later on, you're going to see it's also the choice of the posing. So a lot of poses like this, you really don't know, other than the thickness of her arms, you really don't know what's going on there. So let me work with something like this. Now, I love her tattoo. This was a raw image, so it came up in Adobe Camera Raw. I look at the histogram. I'm basically okay with the histogram, so I'm just going to open the image. So, like I said, the only thing really giving away her size is the fact that her arms are fairly large. So if I did want to liquify those, come on, computer, where'd you go? Liquify. There we go. I'm going to go to the forward warp tool, and I might just nudge very, very softly, nudge in and slim down her arms a little bit. Now you can do that with forward warp as long as you've got an outside edge to work with. Another way of doing it is in the pucker tool. And with the pucker tool, what's the matter with my brush here? Size is all funky. That's better. Just puck around her arm and just make it a little slimmer. If I zoom in on her face, her chin, that pose is great for eliminating double chins. So we have good definition in her chin, except cheeks are a little bit puffed out. So I might just very softly push them in using the forward warp tool. Now, some people will go as far as to change the entire shape of the face. And when they do that, it's normally forward warp tool that they're using. They'll make a fairly large brush, and they'll go in about the temple area and just nudge the face in a little bit. To be honest, I very rarely do that. I think I've done that maybe once in the past 2 years. I don't want to take this plus-size girl and make her look like she's one of the other models. That's not faithful to reality. I want to make her look as good as I can while being true to who she is. And I explain, we talk about this in our consultation sessions. So that's about the only liquefying I might choose to do. Now, other little problems, because this is a real world room set, I've got an electrical plug in the wall. Well, of course, I could just select that, and using the content area fill, it's gone in a split second. So any other little minor problems around the edges or distracting elements, just take them out. I'd probably go into my softener, skin softener, portraiture. And again, I'd just go to the flattening layer, take my eraser tool, and clean up the areas that I don't want softened, like I did in the other examples. Eyes, lips, jewelry, hair. Just erasing the softening mask. And again, I don't go nuts about it. It doesn't have to be perfect because she's invested a lot in this tattoo. I'm going to take the softening off of that and let it come back nice and sharp as well. So that's without softening and with softening. Nice, soft, glamour type of effect. Okay, let me catch up on some of the questions before I go any further. From guest 762, you did the image as an 8x10. If the client wants another size, would you redo the image again and crop to the new size? Depending on the composition of the image, let me find the one that I did that to. I think that was the 8x10, wasn't it? Yeah. So what if this customer went in and ordered a 5x7? So I'll go to my 5x7 crop tool. And in this case, I can just crop the 8x10 to a very fine 5x7, and I don't have to go back and redo the original. Now, if, however, I had elements of the photo that were too close to the edge and I needed to retain, occasionally I would have to go back to the original and redo it to a different size. At 5.7s, which for us are the same as a wallet size, same proportions as a wallet size, 8x10s, very rare. We don't really sell 4x6s in our packages. 4x6 is a nice proofing size if I was doing paper prints, but I don't see it as something that I sell because on our price list, we price everything 5x7 and smaller is all the same price. So you pay as much for a 4x6 as you do for 5x7. So nobody orders 4x6s. So that's how I would handle that. Guest 212 would like to see the next step. Well, it's really the next the next 12 steps. It's a 12-step program. There's a lot, and I'm going to do some more advanced, or at least intermediate retouching broadcasts in the not too distant future. How do I fix braces? Braces, I'm too impatient for braces. If they want braces removed, we don't do it automatically. They have to pay for it, and I send it out to a retouching house and have them do it. I could do it painstakingly, but frankly, I don't want to spend my time. I'm better shooting than I am removing braces. So there are a number of retouching houses you can use that are relatively affordable. They're not insane. And I think it's because they're using, foreign nationals, Filipinos or Indians, whatever. I don't want to say that in a derogatory manner, but they don't get paid like we do in North America. And so they can do an amazing amount of work for very little money. Excuse me. From guest 212, how much do we use selective focus? I try and manage my focus in camera. Let me go back to this shot for a second. So I shoot a lot of work like this at f4. f4 I find gives me enough depth of field to cover the tip of the nose to the ears, but it starts to make the other areas of the photo drop off really nicely. I think there was another one, not that one, this one. Notice how, her eyes and face are in focus, but already by her shoulders starting to drop focus, and by the time we get to her tattoo down on her thigh and down to her feet, it's a lot out of focus. So I try and do that in camera by shooting at shallow f-stops, wide f-stops, and then if I need to add blur in post-production, I might, but it's pretty rare. So I had softened this photo. I might go in and brighten the eyes just a little bit. And like I said, there's 27 different ways of doing this. I just use the dodge tool on a very low exposure. Now, here's what I've been doing that I really like. I set my color balance when I'm shooting available light in the studio lights, and as you can probably guess, there's a lamp right in behind her head that's tungsten balanced. So it's giving this warm yellowish tone to the background, but yet her skin, if anything, is a little on the cool side. And I'm liking that, and my customers are liking that. I don't rebalance the skin to make it warm. I keep it exactly as a cool skin tone. I like it. Customers like it. So I was just reading a question. For select focus, there are tools that blur the areas away from the face and soften the overall effect. Do I use any of those tools? No, the only tool I really use is blur, the blur tools that are built into Photoshop already. I don't have any third-party plugins for that. So going back to the subject of plus size models, customers. So the pose, by the nature of it, hides so many problem areas other than her arms. So let's go to a different pose. Now this is boudoir, so we normally want to make sure we get some cleavage. So, you know, the retouching would be exactly the same on this. That wouldn't change. Another good way for plus size is to lie them down. When they're lying on their back, of course, it compresses a lot of areas and hides a multitude of sins. This is all available light, nothing, no flash at all used in this entire session, just the light coming in through those doors. I'm trying to find an image. I know it's here somewhere. So seated poses. The bustier again is covering a lot of the problems with the tummy area, but the pose also is contributing to hiding the bulges. We also have miscellaneous pieces of material around the studio that we can drape them in for artistic effect, we tell them, but really it's to hide problem areas. So again, lying down, don't really get the idea that she's that plus size. These shirts are ours. We keep some man shirts around. They're a very popular prop. And yes, guest 212, posing for the plus side. Well, posing is everything for everybody, but perhaps more important for plus size. And like I said, that's most of our customers are a little bit plus. Yeah, and somebody was mentioning about this color variation that I've been liking. between the cool skin tones and the warm background tones. So often in photography, we've been taught to correct the color balance. If we shot indoors in the days of film, we were told that we needed to, buy tungsten film for tungsten light and daylight film for everything else. And in the beginning of digital, I was all worried about, making the color balances bang on. And then as time went on and my tastes moderated or changed, I started to discover that playing with different color balances within the same photo is actually pretty darn cool. For plus size girls, what do I do for fat rolls? Well, again, key number one is don't photograph them, but sometimes you can't avoid it no matter how hard you try. So part number two would be Liquify. Let me just see where we wound up with her. Oh, her husband was a firefighter, so she brought some firefighting equipment. So, okay, we want fat rolls. There we go. So these are much, much harder shots to work with. You're dealing with not only the XS plus size person, but you're dealing with this cellulite texture. My number one solution is A, not to photograph it, B, crop it out of the picture. But then if I can't, it goes back to Liquify. So I'll just bring this one in real quick. I'd start with the forward warp tool. I'd start just moving some of this in. And this is when your retouching time tends to go up a lot. Get a larger tool to reduce overall body size a little bit. And again, I don't want to make her look like a real skinny model. But on the other hand, I don't want her to be totally shocked when she sees herself. I'm a big guy myself. I hate walking through a mall and catching my reflection in a mirror because I think, oh my God, what have I done? So I just play with this and play with this until that was probably too far. And then I'd crop some of this out, or, I'm going to have a massive retouching job down there. And also use the pucker tool. A really large brush to slim her whole body down. So I did a really fast and somewhat sloppy job of that, but you get the idea. She still looks plus size, but not quite as bad as reality. Where am I going here? That's what I want. I'm trying to think if I have any others that I can show. She had given me permission. I don't think I have any other plus size ladies where I have permission to show their photos. So for me, I want to spend no more than 2 hours in retouching for an average boudoir session. I want to wind up with something in the order of 30 images to show. I put those, as I mentioned in our other productions, I put them into an Animoto slideshow as the first thing that they see. Then they go and select their images. So if there are any other questions, we will do more on retouching. There's a lot, obviously, a lot more that you can get into with Photoshop. Get into changing colors and dealing with the nature of other programs or problems. For me, other than the body shape and scars on the body, and by scars I mean things like varicose veins or stretch marks or cellulite. Other than that, there are various problems that you run into. Extracting an image from the background and replacing the background. These are other things that we do, and I'll just give you kind of a teaser. Maybe I can find an image and just give you a quick idea of what we do when we try something like that. See if I did it with Lori. No, I used a real background with her. I got to find a plain background. Oh, this will do. I'm not going to retouch this entire image, but one of the things that I do is I just have to get my overlays open. I have a variety of overlays that I use in some post-production, and this gets into the area of masking. I don't know how comfortable you are with masking, but I have one, and I bought these from stock photo agencies. So I call this one Nightclub, and I just make it fit, same size as the photo. Go to my layers palette and change the blending mode at first. I'll change it to something like overlay, so I can actually see where the model is. Then I'll add a mask. Take my brush tool at low opacity. Let's start mid 30s, 40s, something like that. And I'll lightly go over the shape of the model so that when I go back to normal, I can actually see where she is and continue with the masking. So I'm trying to make this a little bit fantasy in this case. I'm going to not be perfect intentionally. I'm going to remove mask or erase most of the mask over the model, but I'm not going to worry about the edges. I want her shape to show, but I want it to look like some of these bubbles are in front of her instead of just a mask that's all in the background. And then it's pretty much just seasoned to taste after this. I make sure the mask is good and clear, usually over the face, but I'm not going to go through and try and define the edges of her jacket or anything like that. I want it to spill over. So that's another technique in boudoir retouching. We have a variety of these overlays that we drop in, and they're very easy because we're not trying to make them precise. It's not like we're trying to take the pen tool and go through every little pixel. I've done that, and frankly, I'd rather poke myself in the eye with hot pokers than I would to try and do an extraction like that. And then when I'm happy, of course, you just flatten it down. Different effects for different people. I do this same technique on most of our boudoir sessions, and it's about 50-50. Half of them don't like it at all and pass right over the image, and the other half really like it. So, you can't just generalize and say, oh, I'm not going to do that. Go with the things that you like for sure, but then keep in mind that, customers have different tastes as well. There are some things, some kind of techniques that I don't really like that much, but our customers keep on buying them. So what can you do? Can't argue with a paying customer. So with that, we're going to wrap this section up. Thank you very much for joining. This is our new webinar format. I hope this format worked out for you. And we're probably going to stay with this new format in future webinars. So any last minute questions or? Okay. Well, we'll be back in a couple of weeks' time. We're back next Tuesday, not tomorrow, but next Tuesday with another DittoCam production called The Creative Camera. And we're back with a series on wedding photography. It's a big series. It's a 10-part series, actually, 12-part series on getting into wedding photography. That's going to start in a couple weeks' time. So watch your emails for the announcements on that. In the meantime, thank you for coming and have a great night, everybody.